I just don't see at all evidence for why it is right.
Oh, okay, it's supported by the first paragraph. It says,
But like how?
so take a look at it. It says, most multiplayer online games prohibit real-world trade in virtual items, right? But some, so most games don't allow real-world trade of virtual items. So you can't trade your avatars in the real world.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
But some actually encourage it, for example, by granting participants intellectual property rights in their creations. Okay, now we go down to the fourth paragraph. By contrast, tax doctrine and policy counsel taxation, blah, 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 and in games that are intentionally commodified. What's that referring to? It's referring to the games that encourage this real-world trade.
How do you do that?
Huh? How do we know that?
I
Because so this passage starts out by saying, hey, there's these two games. You have multiplayer online games that prohibit real-world trades, but some actually encourage it. And then these two paragraphs in the middle are talking about like the items, the virtual items that are created in these games. And then at the end, it talks about specifically the games that are intentionally commodified. So that would go back to the one, not the ones that prohibit it, but the ones that encourage it. I think what happens is you probably lose sight of the big picture here when you're like going through all the details in the second and third paragraph, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, in-world sales for virtual currency is should be taxed or whatever. But the point is that those games are referring to the games in the first paragraph, and it says that they grant participants intellectual property rights. So what we're doing is we're combining the first paragraph with the last.
Okay. I guess part of my confusion is I'm having a hard time telling the difference between like the never mind, I can't explain it really well.
The difference between
Can I just talk to you later? I think I'm just gonna eat up a bunch of time, but
Okay,
you better
sure,
spend
no problem.
other questions.
Can we talk about why A is incorrect?
Sure. So in this passage, right, in the very first paragraph, they talk about real world trade in virtual items. So what's that? You have a virtual item, you have an avatar, and you're trading that in the real world. Okay? So it's not happening inside the game. You're going outside the game, finding someone, they're buying it from you or something like that. Sound good? Then it says, where is this? Take a look at line 36. And is the profit in a purely in-game trade. So notice in-game trade means that there are trades that are inside the game, and then there are real-world trades. But in both cases, on line 36 and on line 28, they're referring to virtual items, right? They've never talked about real items yet. You cool with that?
Yeah.
Then on line, where was this? Oh yeah, 50. Moreover, in-game trades of virtual items should be treated as taxable. Sound good? So again, we're talking about, all we've talked about so far is virtual items. Virtual items in the real world, virtual items in-game, and then now we have this last thing. The taxation of the sale of virtual items for real currency and in games that are intentionally commodified, even of in-world sales for virtual currency. Now, if you just looked at that one sentence, in-world sales, in-world sales of what? But throughout this entire passage, they've only talked about the sale of virtual items. So this in-world sales must be referring to the real-world sales that they were talking about at the beginning, which again were referring to virtual items. So because there's no mention ever of real items being sold, they're only talking about in-game sales of virtual items or out-of-game or in-world sales of virtual items. This in-world sales must be referring to virtual items, which is why A is wrong. By introducing real items, it just brings up a new idea that was never discussed.
But isn't cash a real item? Right? Like, what if I traded game dollars for real dollars? I just commodified the game.
Yeah, but we have to look for evidence that that's supported, right? That there is the sale, allowing the sale of real items for virtual currency. Lila?
Why is, I don't understand, like, I understand why D could be right now, but I don't understand why E is wrong. Because E is an example of an in-world sale, right?
Players of the game can exchange one virtual currency for another virtual currency?
Why isn't that an example?
When did they talk about two different virtual currencies? And exchanging one for the other? They talk about exchanging virtual items for virtual currency,
Well, so, I know they didn't.
or virtual items for real currency.
Yes.
But what about virtual currency for virtual currency?
Yeah, like I said, they didn't talk about it, but I don't understand how it's, okay, like D might be more right, but I don't know how E is wrong, because it's an example.
Are you looking for it to be disproven by the passage? Okay, so that's one. Sometimes these answers are wrong just because they're just not supported.
So even if it would make sense,
What do you mean would make sense?
Because-
real nice.
an in-world sale would just be something that's happening totally in the game, right?
In-world sales is referring to, this is what we were just talking about,
Yeah.
sales of virtual items outside the game.
Not even sales of virtual items inside the game?
No, that would be in-game sales. So you have in-game sales and you have in-world sales, but they're referring to sales of virtual items. This passage never discusses the sale of real items.
Okay, that's fine, I get it.
So virtual currency and virtual currency doesn't even talk about the virtual items.
Okay,
That's just like two different currencies. Like you have Bitcoin and you have, I don't know, World of Warcraft coin or something. And you're changing one for the other. They never even talked about that. Is that?
okay, yeah. I think I just thought in-world
Okay.
could also mean in-game. I thought in-world encompassed in-game, because games in the world, but I think this is too much abstract.
Yeah, so you have to look at the way they use that wording throughout, and they talk about in-world and they talk about in-game. So you have sales within the game itself, and then you have sales that take place outside the game, but they're of the virtual items from the game.
Okay.
Yeah. Messed up passage. Alright, we cool with that one?
No.